You look good. Okay. Senor. Maximilian. I do that. I do that. I don't know what your full name is. What's your full name? You're Max M. This is all I know.
Actually, my last name is in my email address too.
Oh, that's
I have
Aurer? Hour? I don't know.
Maurer. I don't know how to anglicize it. Maurer.
Okay. Oh, those pesky Anglo-Saxons. This makes me think of Age of Empires 2 in high school and things. Well, you are a one of the many people who have viewed some of the thoughts and ideas I have thrown out on the YouTube channel of my name, Walker Stipe. The background I know about you is your natural language processing in the artificial intelligence linguistics kind of space, and you're currently getting a master's,
Right.
and you have a job.
Right.
I don't know what that job is, and I'm titillated to know.
Actually, it doesn't matter a lot.
Okay,
It's
cool. We
just
can
a side
totally leave it out.
site.
Like websites?
No, like a side job thing to.
Okay.
I mean, pay the bills.
Sure. Like construction sort of stuff? I've done a lot of that in the
No,
past. Not my forte.
actually, I don't know how to say that in English. It's basically delivering, not the delivery part per se, but producing small parts for industrial
Okay.
firms
Sure.
that then make machines out of it, basically.
Love it.
So
Love it.
small parts of machines.
Yeah. Someone needs to make them. You're making them. Something like that. Delightful.
Yeah.
What do you hope to do? Let's do an introduction. You're Max. Who are you, Max? I've stated what I know. You tell me what I and others should be aware of.
I mean, um, basically, I'm a guy who's passionate about a lot of things. Among them is AI and linguistics. I started with linguistics and then kind of slided into the natural language processing field.
Love it.
But aside from that, also political stuff. Music is a
Okay.
big hobby of mine.
Interesting. Playing or more listening to. Those are the two
Oh,
options I can think of.
yeah. Mostly producing music, mixing, mastering for friends these
Look
days.
what I
But I
know.
started as a guy who produced some beats and that
That's
kind of
awesome.
stuff.
That's a path I almost went down in life, is like trying to be a musician, actually, which is very wild to think about how different life and even like who I am would likely be. I always think it's fun to think like who you could have become and like didn't, multiple possibilities and stuff like that. But it sounds like you've pursued a lot of those and not dropped them. Like you're still pursuing them to some degree.
To
Yes.
some extent.
Nice.
To some extent, yeah. Actually, a lot of friends of mine, or a few friends of mine,
Sure.
are starting music projects, and I'm delighted that I can be a help to them
Yeah.
and make the great ideas they have sound even better. Like,
Literally. That's awesome.
and yeah.
Sweetness. Do you have a preferred best outcome? What is the greatest of all possible worlds for Senor Maximilian? Can I say Maximilian? It's just so fun to say. I don't know if it's correct at all.
You can. It is
Okay.
correct.
Oh, it is. Hey, nice. I called my friend Alexander. He's like, it's just Alex. I'm like, oh, whoops, sorry. But like, do you hope to? I mean, I guess you're getting the masters in the one field of linguistics, natural language processing, AI stuff. but not in music production. So is there a primary essence, a focus of the Signor Max?
I mean, music is a great passion of mine, and I'd love to be able to live off of that, but it does not seem really realistic.
It's
And
hard.
also, I think I don't know if I would call it a duty, but I'd like to make the world a better place, as stupid as it might sound.
I
But
think it's a sexy thing to say.
if you can do even a little part, and I
Mhm.
guess most people are doing their part,
One could make an
I
argument most people
at
are doing
least,
a negative, a net negative. Many animals around
yeah,
the world would certainly say so. Um,
but yeah,
but that's cool. I think that's a really you said some things I think in like your first email you shared that I was like, whoa, this is a fellow you don't meet every day. I mean, just what you said there is, I think a lot of people think, oh, I want to help, I want to do my part, and then the actual sort of like nuts and bolts of what that looks like either just totally breaks down and they don't actually achieve that thing, or kind of more likely, they're sort of like the result of their achieving their dream is actually net negative. Um, and I think, sort of in the year of 2020, we saw a fair number of those sort of all come together and be like, oh, these things we thought were good were actually bad. Um, Whatever. But
I don't know. It's kind of difficult to say if there's actually a net negative. Maybe on a short term there is, but at least my hope is that the positive impact people have on their surrounding, even with a small action, might lead to a net positive on the long run. But
sure. And I think that
maybe that's just wishful thinking.
yeah, and that's what I think. Like looking sort of at the aggregate, the large scale, where it's like, okay, like a lot of people had that thinking. How did it work out? Oh, it doesn't look like it's worked out very well. Or it's worked out very well for some people, and it doesn't look like it's going to work out very well long term. So I think you sort of stating, hey, maybe I should be the one who's actually like kind of an adult, because there aren't very many of them. Um, and I guess just to like give, I don't know, a good example is like, Facebook, is a big company, and not only does everyone like using these products like recognize like, hey, this is like tearing us apart and killing us, but also like the numbers back that up. So like people feel that, and it is the case, and there's like the dystopian, sci-fi direction they're taking us, as well as just the whole consumerism thing. I digress. I'm glad you're hoping to do something meaningful and net positive, good, what have you. Excuse me. Tight. What you're obviously, I believe I can intuit, not a native English speaker. Germany, is that what you
Right.
said?
Yeah.
Delightful. How are things there? Broad question.
Um, I mean, they are getting better, I guess,
Nice.
in terms of COVID.
Coronavirus stuff.
We had some political hiccups, I would call
Sure.
them.
It's wild that I
Um,
know nothing at all about those political hiccups. We've had our own fish frying here. Any
yeah.
summary worth interest without getting
Mm.
the SS showing up to your house?
Thankfully, there's no SS anymore.
Yay!
There
The
are
KGB
some.
though, the CIA, they're still
Ah,
around. Well,
there are some people wanting to go in that direction, and it showed in coronavirus protests, which was really disturbing to see actual neo-Nazis march besides somewhat, I don't know, concerned people, and esoteric people.
Hmm.
It was or still is a wild mix
Sure.
of really, I don't know, people that normally don't work together, but they do. And we had
Hmm.
actually um, a similar incident like you had with the Capitol storming.
Did you
There
really?
were there were
Wow.
neo-Nazis, and they are called Querdenker, which means something like um, people who think outside the box, which is mind-blowing that they try to call themselves that, but that's the
Wow.
term they use for themselves for
Sure.
this conglomerate of neo-Nazis, concerned people, esoteric people, and some really, really weird conspiracy theorist people.
Interesting.
And they tried to storm our um, parliament building, essentially.
Wow. Wow,
But
that's wild.
I, I
Huh.
guess the good thing is
Goodness.
here in Germany, it showed to be possible that 3 policemen can protect the stairs of that parliament building, which didn't quite work as well for you,
No,
I
no, it did
guess.
not. And I don't know all the details about all that. It in many many ways looked like a meme. Like a lot of people were like, "Hey, this is kind of funny. Look, I'm in Nancy Pelosi's office." Like, "Hey, I'm in the Oval Office" or wherever. But then some people died. I don't know the whole thing. Politically, things are not good here, though. That's for certain. Um, oh, pardon. Um, yeah. So one thing I'm very is has been on my mind is what is the next stage, and not so much like how is politics. Oh, let's rehash Marx and Lenin and I don't know, John Locke or whatever. But like, how does technology interact with the future of what it is to exist in some sort of society, or just there are multiple humans and robots around? Um, do you have any thoughts on that? I have many new ones.
I mean, we have some immediate problems that will be there in the conceivable future. Like, for example, digitalization in general, or like we actually could do a lot of things even without AI automatically. Most people that, I mean, just push Excel tables,
Oh, you mean like
maybe
Axel, like a
Excel,
oh
the
Excel?
Microsoft
Got it. Like the
thing.
documents and computer things, something like car axle. Continue. My apologies.
These kinds of people will be replaced basically, or actually can be replaced right now.
Yeah, yeah.
And with AI, it's getting worse for those people. I mean, it's getting better in terms of productivity for uh, at least for some corporations, I guess.
Yes, yes. Those with enough
But
lobbying power,
um,
or whatever it is in the Germany.
we can see in the conceivable future that we have a large part of the population that does not get any income.
Yeah.
And that's one of only the immediate problems. There are, when we talk about AI, there are some problems we can actually think about right now, but are quite far away, or maybe a bit further away than
Sure.
those kinds of problems. Yeah, it's difficult. And I don't know if we
Really
have
difficult.
the frameworks to actually solve them yet. Even for those immediate problems that
Yeah.
will be there in a few years, or are
Or
starting
are
to.
already here. Like
Yeah.
I think coincidentally, not planned, but the first video I put out was on the wealth distribution, and I have rarely been so shocked by a data set. Um, I mean, I was just floored, and that was things have not. We've gotten further towards a you know the tiny percentage of the winners control and decide pretty much everything. Um,
And that's a problem across the board. The situation in Germany is
oh, really? Okay.
similar, or maybe even worse. I'm not
Really?
sure about the exact data,
Wow. So one thing
but
I think is super important to recognize is that the problem is not capitalism, communism. Like it's so much kind of more basic than that. It's really, I think, like the natural world has better examples of this sort of thing. And also that like it's like, oh, it's human nature. No, no, no. This is what life does. This is a living thing. This isn't human at all. And sort of I think like getting that framework set down sort of allows us to like analyze the problem in a way that might actually approach some solutions. Um, so, I think, surprise, surprise, I don't think that the human, as like the human literally physically is like with our um, sort of like fundamentally alone, we can't really understand each other that well. I don't think we can solve this sort of thing. I think that, said another way, the sociopath is the Ubermensch. And oh fuck. Like, oh no. I guess you can use Ubermensch because that's actually it's a German word. But the Superman, the idea of this being that what's the, I don't know boxing phrases, but like the winner takes all. Um, that's not been shown to work well in the past, hundreds. I mean, 100 years particularly, and definitely not presently. Bezos not treating his employees very well. Bill Gates being like, "Hey, India, I'm sorry, but we want our money. So is this a genocide? Yeah, but I want my money." Um, so I think that there are a few areas of research that I'm beating my head against, but I'm not. I feel that sort of in line of the discussion around somebody needs to be an adult. That's kind of the one where I feel isn't being taken A, seriously enough, and then B, that's sort of like the timeline that these people are thinking about is they're thinking about like the future, and I'm like, no, right now. Um, and then lastly was just how difficult the problem is. I think a lot of people think it's easier than it really is. I think it's one of the hardest problems ever, and I might say it's like the preeminent problem of existence. Humble claim. But I do think it's solvable because I have no respect at all. So let's try.
the only thing we can do is try.
Yeah.
I think
Sorry, Yoda.
the um, the thing about the problem as a whole is that it's actually a lot of not so small problems, a lot of big problems, and even more small problems. If we think about economic,
Sure. But is it
inequality,
possible, and this is much of sort of my thesis here, that there is a root cause of those problems? I'm proposing, I don't know if you saw the dog eat dog video, but that's sort of, I'm proposing that all of these, different problems we have are emergent. They're caused by one problem, which is the problem of kind of like the self. And it's like, hey, it's easier for me to take your money than make my own money. It's poor. It's a dog eat dog world, literally just that. And sort of that, because that's true fundamentally, literally in like surreal numbers, like that's the most basic form of existence. you scale that up, and it just looks like human society with the wealth distribution just being as hilarious as it is. My proposition is that if we could solve that really basic foundational thing, then you also solve all those other little problems. It's fairly similar to artificial intelligence. This is the last invention humanity needs to create. Yeah.
At least AGI might
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
Um,
Or it'll be the last thing we do, much in the same way the last thing you do is pull the trigger. Potentially. High risk, high reward, for sure.
it might be even harder of a problem, this whole dog eat dog
Yeah.
thing, because there are antagonists actually trying to stop anyone from even trying to solve that.
That's what
And
I'm most worried about, yeah.
I think it's not even about people or these specific people or groups not wanting a better world, but being too comfortable with their own position at any given time. And I think on one thing, I don't know if you meant to go in that direction, but I actually don't think quite as much people think in the long term or try to solve stuff in the long term, on the long term, especially those billionaires or the entities, the
Sure
corporations they control don't actually do that. I think a good example for that is the like button. They introduced it.
Yeah, it's a very good one.
I mean, let's see what it does, and the effects are pretty bad, I would say.
Dangerous feedback loops.
The only thing they seem to really care about, maybe in the past it wasn't quite like that, but the only thing they currently care about are short-term goals, like the
shareholder value, stakeholder value,
and the money the stakeholders get out of
dividends, profit, other
right?
Boring terms.
It's actually quite the same word.
I think that is very often true, but there are outliers, which might not be outliers. They might be sort of a true signal, and it's a bit fuzzy. Sort of is stakeholder value the scapegoat for, no, we actually have an agenda, and we're sort of lumping it in, there's a term I'm looking for. It doesn't matter. For instance, China has a plan. They know what they're doing. They don't have any stakeholders. They own their stakeholders. Bill Gates, I think it's fair to say at this point, he seems to have a plan. I don't know if it's a good one. Maybe it's just to be the czar of all health. I don't know if that's a good one either. And sort of like, for most corporations, large to small, what have you, for most individuals, you need to make your boss happy. You need to da-da-da. And that's true all the way up the hierarchy. But then you get to the top, and then it's whatever plan you want it to be. Maybe it's eugenics. Maybe it's it's just absolute control entirely. What China's doing, and then I think that gets us. I think that that's sort of the real issues we're currently facing, and less about sort of I think neoliberalism is what it's often referred to, but just kind of that sort of, well, it's got to make money. It's got to be short-term profit margins good, because that's what extinct species say. The species that are still around much of the time are like, no, we'll take it slow. We'll make good decisions. We won't over leverage. Da da da. The sponge, the mole. What was it? The slime molds you mentioned. Fascinating. Check it out if anyone's curious. They're intelligent in a befuddling way. The sloth, the tree. These are things that are very stable boom bust cycle. They don't really give a damn. And it's possible that, all of humanity is just a sort of a flash in the pan. And that sort of race to the bottom, that greedy algorithm is actually what undoes you. There we go.
And I think the dangerous part about China is they actually plan long term.
Yeah.
And they are doing everything in their power to stay stable.
Mm-hmm. And succeeding.
Right.
Yeah. And that's why I think the only sort of reasonable, quote unquote, attack vector is in the AI space. Because, let me know if you have any thoughts, but I don't see any reasonable attack vector, path of escape of fixing this really is an option for anyone. And I mean nation states, I mean individuals who are billionaires. I don't know how you stop that beast. I don't know how you do it. So I'm like, okay, well, rather than, try and fight fairly, which is a horrible idea, can I design an AI that couldn't be used to mass surveil the entire Xinjiang region with 400 million cameras? Sort of rebellion at the fundamental metaphysical level. So that sounds like fun. But then also realizing that might even be a really bullshit idea. And it's time to start learning Mandarin.
Maybe. I think the AI might be an attack vector, but the difficult thing is China works on some pretty fascinating but also scary AI too. And I guess it would be a weapons race, arms race.
Yeah.
And we can only, I don't know if that's actually true, but we can only do something about stuff that already exists, or we can actually conceive the risks of because we know how it might work. For example, if we think about automatic drones shooting people with facial recognition.
Hello, my name is Obama. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Oh.
They have to, maybe they don't have to exist, but we do need to have a clear picture of all all it entails, what that system actually does to develop countermeasures in some meaningful way.
Potentially, but I think much of the time, if you can sort of get outside of the domain, the confines of a subject matter, then you can be certain. Let me think of a good example. But if you can get outside of the confines, then you can be certain that whatever is contained inside still remains in your sort of knowable paradigm. Wow, that was a terrible way to say that. Kind of like the transitive property in mathematics, which is like if this is bigger than that, and we know certain things, and we know that this still holds, then this is still kind of like that. But let's use a different example. Who owns the internet? No one owns the internet. But that's not really true, is it? Donald Trump has been canceled, which is shocking. He's one of the most famous people of all time. And, I don't think anyone could have predicted that Twitter and Facebook banning him off just their platforms would have such an effect that he would kind of go invisible again. Literally like pre-presidency and all that sort of stuff levels of interest. But I think, we kind of could have known that. Like there are things that you can know just based on, a few sort of salient, latent features, such as like, if it's not Facebook or Twitter, it doesn't really exist. And anyone who's sort of gone on their own hasn't really figured it out. So that was even true for the most outlandish case, Donald Trump. So back to the case of like military drones. I think that if we could sort of figure out that like multi-agent dog-eat-dog problem, then that covers everything else, including military drones killing people. Maybe they'd be like, hey, innocent peasants, probably fine. Where's Winnie the Pooh? Where's Zuckerberg? Let's go take some pot shots, would be my guess as far as like what is the... and this is kind of why I think transhumanism is a fascinating idea, because I do think it is sort of that encapsulating, overarching sort of like, if we shoot at that goal, we're going to get there. And a lot of religions have sort of like this thesis of, there's one thing you got to do, follow Christ, Muhammad, whatever, and everything else, whatever the phrase. But sort of that if you aim at an infinite horizon, transhumanism, I think that like encapsulates all the other sort of like that reward function is the only necessary objective you need to understand. Does that coalesce into a meaningful exploration of, we need to have full understanding, we need to know fully? I'm like, no, we only need to get like the bounds of the thing, only like the basic structure.
I guess it makes sense, but the problem I see there is that until we get there are pitfalls we can conceive and cannot yet conceive.
That's definitely true.
And to get there, we have to circumvent them and do something about it. If AGI, if it's possible in the conceivable future, that's a whole other large discussion. And it actually solves our problems and makes us superhuman, Übermensch, whatever.
Sure.
The
philosopher, not the politician. Okay, it's Nietzsche, not the.
Let's be clear.
To be clear, we're not neo-Nazis. Fuck that. Good to clarify.
But how do we prevent the wrong people to get there first and being able to contain whatever that might mean?
Sure.
Contain the power it entails. Because that would be actually the furthest thing from what we want from it.
Yeah.
It would mean absolute dystopy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So do you have any thoughts there? You're one of the few people I know of in the world who are seriously aware of that. At least,
I think a large part of it might be empathetic machines, if that makes any sense. We need to teach the thing we try to build empathy. But because only when it's empathetic towards us, it actually cares about us, right? Which opens a lot of other problems, I guess, because to be empathetic, as far as I know, you have to be capable to suffer. And I don't know if it's a good idea to teach a system like that to suffer in a way that would be comparable to human suffering.
I would probably argue they already are capable of suffering, and in a pretty like relatively rudimentary way of there's the reward. You won the game, you lost the game, and if you lost the game, you're like, shit, how do I win next time? So it's a productive, godly grief. It's a productive suffering. It's not nihilistic. It's not sadistic. It's not like ha 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 suffering robots. I'm not into that anyhow. So I think like that part might be fine. Like some suffering is good, and we don't want to totally get rid of that. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure you're just dead. But whatever, Steven Pinker or whoever the philosopher guy is aside, the empathy thing, something I've talked a lot about. I think what. How do we make sure empathy doesn't, how do I say this? You can be evil and empathetic. You can say like, hey, I feel your pain and it hurts me to hurt you, but I'm gonna do it anyway. And I don't know. I don't know that one. And that's kind of why I think like empathy is required but not sufficient. It's necessary but not sufficient. There's the phrase. Thoughts on that?
Right. Empathy is necessary but not sufficient. There needs to be an incentive to actually be productively empathetic or
okay.
I mean empathetic in the sense that it actually benefits us and the interests of whatever the system might have in mind. And if we talk about a generally intelligent, or not even generally intelligent, but capable of thoughts in a similar way as we humans have them,
I have to think about that one. That's an interesting one. And I think that's kind of, I'm imagining, well, not entirely imagining, I've had a number of conversations about this, where people believe, I don't believe based on anything, or I don't find really based on reality, that cooperation is always the best. No, a lot of times it's optimal to steal, to kill, and this sort of thing. And I mean,
at
both.
least. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go. Interrupt as much as you may.
At least if you again think on the short term. On the long term, it in most cases makes sense to have at least a bit of cooperation, or the ideal would be to have something of a, I don't know what it's actually called.
Hive mind?
That would be, yeah. Then you would be empathetic to yourself, because all of us
You are, yeah.
is yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But we want a system to have some kind of equilibrium if we talk about more than one agent, or if we care about that all agents make it out alive, if we care about each agent.
Yeah. And I think getting that, I that's a question I'm really not sure has an answer, and I kind of doubt that it does. And that's why I do think the hive mind idea is probably one of the more productive ones, and perhaps in particular, Neuralink brain-computer interfaces, really to stop being in quite as much to be a little bit less human and be a little bit more something else.
Less human and more
networked, more like the Protoss. It's fine. I think a lot of religions have that idea of to become part of something greater than yourself, and I hate that because it seems very kind of suicidal, self-degrading, without really a cause. If there's a reason to be like, oh, I have problems, I need to change, sure, but a lot of these discussions, also co-opted by companies like Disney and whatever, seem unfounded to me. Whereas the idea of like, hey, let's not be part of something greater, but like let's be part of something better, and not only but like also lifting you up. That what the proposition of a lot of capitalist arguments are, that the rising tide lifts all boats, which has not always been true. It lifts that boat, and we run out of water, whatever. But that there is a possibility space, that there's a real option of us working together, and really becoming together, kind of like becoming a bit of a fuzzy definition between you and me and us and we, and it's like, hey, we're all kind of the same thing, and not abstractly, but like literally we are kind of the same being. Then we don't have these problems. Like these problems just go away. In the video, there's the classic meme of the dude, that meme where he's like, I don't remember the name of but how do you
I think
solve?
I know which meme you're.
Yeah. I don't know what it's called. It's a meme. But how do you solve the multi-agent problem? How do we solve the dog-eat-dog war as fundamental problem? Just make sure no one else is around. Be the only agent in the universe. And this is kind of that death of God taken to the limit. Math is fun. Sort of where like, let's say humanity was able to unite in this sort of the Kala, StarCraft, but was able to unite in this sort of networked, you are me and I am you, and not the China way, not the 1984 let's lobotomize everybody way, but in a grander sense, that also preserves a sense of self. I believe this is all possible. Yes, it gets dystopian. Everyone's who's like, this guy's insane. Slow down. We're being careful. We're reading good books. And I had a follow-up point that I have forgotten. Shit. I said China, and then I was just like, what do you think about all that? I don't remember my point, so let's move on.
The hive mind thing, or actually becoming one agent, is a
Yes.
solution I haven't thought about that much, and it makes sense because either if we think about the world as a whole or as a environment, we as agents function in.
Sure.
We either reach equilibrium, or there are single winners, or everything is destroyed.
Or that's always an option. Yeah.
And I think the hive mind thing might actually be a solution to increase the likelihood, because it actually combines two of those outcomes to one outcome.
Yeah.
Basically.
A worry I have.
But it,
Go ahead.
yeah,
Or a worry I have is that that's not what China wants. That's not what Bill Gates and maybe even our more friendly Elon Musk, where it's like, no, I'd rather be the winner. We could be a hive mind, but I like me. I don't really like you. Why would I muddy my own mind with you in there? And I think that's very possible. The sociopath exists. Sociopath don't want nobody else. And importantly, it is very possible that it's, for instance, like in AI, not only doesn't need anyone else, but it is actually worse off with anyone else. Alpha Zero is a great example of this, where it sort of was alone its entire existence. And when it finally faced off against anyone else, Gary Kasparov or Lee Sedol, whatever, it shat on them. They were children. It was far too powerful. And it's like, oh, well, what about like a human AI collaboration? It's like, no, I'm good. I'm Alpha Zero and I'm better than everyone. I'll be a hive mind with myself. Also, I'd like your lunch and your lunch. I'll just take all the lunches. Because, growing infinitely and infinite
or
hunger.
not even
sort of
that. It might be even more simple. If we're actually not important to it, whatever that system might be, it treats us like we treat, and this is an analogy that's used quite often, but I think it fits. We're ants to it.
Yeah.
We're dumb little things that are interesting and have their working societies, more or less, in humans as well as in ants. But if it wants, or if we're in its way, it will step on us.
Yeah. And if we pose any risk, there's just no reason to keep us around. And it's pretty likely that, one of us will bite it. And it's like, hey, screw these things. Let's get these out of here. And that's why I think the only sort of safe option forward definitely includes us becoming a form of AI, which is mega risky and looks, more and more like a 1984 dystopia than anything fun, which is too bad.
But I actually don't know if it's true that more powerful beings, in which way ever, are actually the dog-eat-dog way we are.
Interesting.
If there's no biological need to be better than everybody else in their niche. I don't know if something like the
interesting thought
antagonistic nature of humans and like animals in general, these tendencies we see, we actually don't know if they stem from that drive to live and to be prosperous in the biological niche.
What do you think about the idea that this is not a feature of biology, but rather a feature of existence and more of like a math, existential physics space? I think it is. What do you think?
That's quite possible, but
yeah,
I think my main point on that is...
Oh, your mic just got quiet. Say again. We don't know.
The main thing is we don't know what happens if we take out important variables of that equation. And I mean, it might be a feature of reality, but I guess if it's possible, we will find out if AGI or something like it
Hmm.
is
And the
possible.
answer was 42 all along. Have you read A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
I never read it, but I saw the films as a
Okay,
kid.
nice.
So
I've done the
yeah.
opposite. I've read them and not seen them. So Deschanel, peach. Peach of a human? Can you say that? I don't know. That sounds strange. Yeah, great book. But I do love that idea of sort of like that there is an answer to these questions, and it's it might take a lot. It might take a true super intelligent being. It might take converting the entire planet Earth into a computer, and we are the computational nodes, as we are attempting, I guess, to show here. Because yeah, these are big, hefty problems, and that's kind of why I think philosophy is great, but really there's not much. Basically a lot of the questions and answers we don't know, have not been asked, and that are, excuse me, kind of the computational framework that we have is quite useful. That sort of now it's DeepMind, it's OpenAI, it's people like that sort of doing philosophy, and it's not somebody with a nice mustache or a great beard, in the case of Marx and Nietzsche. I had something else I was going to say on that. Goodness, pardon. Oh, Stuart Russell. Right, that's where I was going. So that's why I think the Dog Eat Dog, this video I put out, really the reason I kind of felt comfortable enough to make that and propose that is like, hey, this is something fundamental, is because of his work, which I cannot speak intelligently on because it is one of the mathiest papers I've ever read, and I didn't understand it. But if there's anyone worth trusting, he is very, very, very high on that list. So he says this is fundamental in game theory and that sort of thing. I trust him, as well as sort of my own opinion on metaphysics and physics and math. But never forget, you could be wrong in every possible way. That includes me. So I hope that I am, but I don't plan that I am. I plan that this is, plan for the worst case and then be happy when it's better than that. Language. What is it? Who gives a shit? And how do we use it for spicy badassery?
First and foremost, the traditional definition is just communication between humans, which is rather interesting, but also kind of boring if we only understand that as language. Because we started to see other communication methods to have like language-like properties, which of course makes sense because language emerged in biological things, us.
Yeah.
And
The monkeys.
some proto forms of it, of course. Why shouldn't they exist in other species?
Sure.
For instance, in dolphins and so on. And
slime molds, maybe. Who knows?
They seem to have some kind of communication. They can transfer, or they can transfer information from one to another. They can teach each other some things.
Like like an individual slime mold to another individual slime mold, or like the individual components in each.
One individuum to another.
Really? What the hell?
They showed that with a crazy salt experiment, where.
How does that happen?
I'm not quite sure if this is 100% correct.
Sure.
Try to recite it to the best of my knowledge, but as far as I understood it, one slime mold made a painful had a painful experience, and touched salt, which apparently
Hmm.
is not good for them.
Sure.
Is painful for them if they can feel pain.
Sure. It's
I
a
mean,
negative reaction. No bueno.
and it learned to not interact with salt. Then they basically, I don't know how it
Conveyed
in practice worked.
whatever to the another.
They let different individuals of slime molds be in a tube, whatever.
Sure. Petri dish, maybe. Who knows?
And the behavior the one slime mold learned, the others showed without actually making the experience, having the experience with the salt, which is fascinating.
So one thing I think is actually crazy about that is there are things. This is kind of like catastrophic for getting in neural nets and whatever, but much of the time our own intellect gets in the way. And for instance, like that's a type of collaborative behavior, which is not only very useful, but is also like seemingly pretty intelligent. And that's a feature that is not shared amongst a lot of much more complex vertebrates and whatever. It might be monkeys, it might be like rats or something. I think it's monkeys that have like a very hard time learning from others, which is weird, which is surprising. And depending on the day, humans aren't so great either, but we are much, we're the best at that of any species, pretty confident. And then you have something like a slime mold, which can perform this without any sort of centralized, like anything, let alone a nervous system. It's like, whoa. So kind of the question of how much does our intellect get in the way of, I don't know, success of things that just get in the way generally is what I mean. Broad question. And more of a hypothetical one. I'm not like, answer the question. Come on, Max, give me the rundown. Explain this very hypothetical, theoretical thing.
The interesting thing about that question is language, or our intellect, which is for the most part comprised of language. Do you know what I mean? Like everything we think of is either language, or some people think in vivid pictures, have a vivid visual imagination.
Yeah. So question on that, because that's absolutely true. And I love, like Temple Grandin, I think does a really good job getting into kind of all of that. But isn't there a whole nother layer of that, which is totally unconscious? It's not, maybe you couldn't even call it feeling. Maybe you couldn't even call it thinking. It's just like fully reactionary. It's fully unconscious. And the question of like, is that really a living thing? If you killed something that is, fully unconscious, but still very complex and intelligent, is that a murder? What is that? And how important is that to a theory of mind, to what an intelligent being is? Sort of beyond the framework of at least language in the typical sense of, visual, lexical, syntactical, letters and words and whatever.
If we understand language as some kind of set of rules and vocabulary that makes up a model of the world with some predictive capacity,
Sure.
I think actually every living thing has to have something like it, at least the representation inside their nervous system, or not even nervous system. If they can
That's
compute,
fun.
if they can compute sensory information, there has to be some representation of that sensory information inside of them. It might be hormones and like biochemical signals,
Sure.
but those are pretty similar to language actually, because they have some
fascinating
vocabulary and some set of rules how they interact.
So, at the minimum, we need to disentangle language vision strictly only being conscious phenomena. That, like, they're more than that. That, like, you can have language and be unconscious, for instance. Is that
I'm not sure if that makes sense, but language has the same properties, or seemingly has the same properties that all other kinds of representations that deal with information and process them in some meaningful way with predictive capacity. But maybe it's the other way around. Maybe language is the way it is.
Oh, I see.
Because it's the only way that makes sense in a at least to that extent of predictive capability to emerge from reality, whatever
Sure.
reality
No, I think
is.
that's said incredibly well. Wow, that was said really well. So, let's define language. So something we briefly chatted about in the email. What is the difference between language and mathematics, physics, metaphysics, and is there any difference at all? I think I don't know if you saw the stuff on unreal numbers I'm proposing, but it's possible that what I mean by unreal numbers is really just language. Wittgenstein fist pumps from his grave.
I would argue that the foundations of math, physics, whatever, are actually the base reality. But the way we approach it are some kinds of languages. Those are formal types of languages. And if you look at mathematical people, I wouldn't even call them papers because they weren't at the time, mathematical works, a lot of it before they introduced the type of notation that we now use, or even types of notation that are forgotten for mathematical concepts. They, of course, used language to describe it. And it actually was, or still is, I would argue, a subset of language, because it is a system we invented or we discovered, whatever, that describes the world, but we primarily describe the world in language and maybe pictures, maybe visual things too. But the primary thing
is it fair to say, if I'm understanding you correctly, language is a mapping from reality, something that exists in the whatever we can estimate to be reality, to a encoding. That's the word. An encoding of it in a different space, right? Like we can't exist in reality in its entirety. So we, for instance, like picked this up off the road in my neighborhood. A nice little nail. Got a flat tire the other day. Many of these around here. It's like this like exists in reality. Ooh. But not only to communicate it to you, like I think language can exist in a world with no one else. You don't. It's not required that there be other agents to communicate to communicate to. Words are hard. But just, sort of for your own clarity and memory, maybe memory being a really big one, that, I don't want to remember everything about this. I want to remember this can puncture my tire. And, whether that gets remembered, encoded as a word, maybe that word is ow, if you like step on it. Or if it gets encoded as a visual, just like the little pointy tip and sharp and blood and whatever, or expensive in my case, then is that a fair estimation of what you mean by language? Or example, maybe.
To some extent, yeah, but I would argue it is even deeper. We have
okay. Go deeper, Joe.
How do I
go even further?
How do I put it?
Sorry.
Yeah, of course. Stuff like the nail there are some objects we can describe, and they have some reality. And actually, I don't know who proposed that idea. It might have basically what our brain, according to some neurologists, seems to do is not to encode actual instances, but rather the concept of a nail, for example.
Kind of in a Platonic sense, but in a practical orientation rather than a metaphysical angle. Did that make sense? Sort of like the idea of cupness or nailness is very useful.
And
yeah?
What seems to happen, I would have to look up who actually worked on that, but what seems to happen is that if we deal with stuff or concepts in a particular situation, it instantiates,
but same thing.
Yeah, so the concept becomes an instance you can deal with in that situation.
Gotcha. Okay. And then is that sort of like then you have a model of the world in your head that you can sort of act in that world and make predictions? I'm taking what you're saying maybe a little bit too far, but
no, it does make sense, because it is a model of reality with some predictive capability, and when it, what was the exact word?
Instantiates.
Or
an instance of same thing.
The whole situation, all the variables you have there play a role, and that's basically the input. You have some kind of representation of what a nail can be inside your brain, and actually it might be the same thing that could happen if we're able to create language models that can deal with ambiguities really, really well. I mean, we as humans are not great at it, but we are better than language models are at the moment. That might actually be what informationally happens in the neural network and the artificial neural network too.
Got it.
And I mean, also seems to be what happens in, for example, a transformer. The transformer architecture forces the model to learn some core concept of words because it has that hourglass, those.
Attention?
Sorry?
Attention? It's the attention mechanism? Or
Attention is one thing of it, but the basic idea is to have or what I'm trying to say is, if you have architectures, which is used in transformers, in some transformers too, if you shrink the input size for each layer a bit, so you have a broad encoder which encodes it to
I see what you're saying.
Data points.
Yeah.
You force the model to learn a compressed representation of whatever the input represents.
Totally. And that does I think there are a lot of well, I guess this gets what's his Marcus Hutter? Is that his name? We've talked about him a bit.
Yeah.
Compression is a big part. I don't know if it's the entire thing, but it is a big part of intelligence. I think power is another big aspect, but I digress. But that's a instantiation of that idea in practice.
And if we think of those concepts in human language as some compressed representation of many different, or not different, similar things, but many instances of a thing that shares some properties, it seems to be something that is a useful representation, or it can lead to a useful representation, and actually not only happens in AI, but is quite similar to how it happens inside our brains.
Sure.
And the whole attention thing is another thing that seems to work well, at least as far as I understood it, because it's fit to the way language is built, and built is maybe the wrong word, but
correct.
The way we process it, and yeah, it gets closer to the relationship of words, of two words in a sentence, for example.
Sure. As in like locality, like this word is next to this word, and it's like this word is further, like sort of distance, like in the actual sentence, and like parse trees and all that. Those are a pain in the ass.
Not only that, but also which other words in the sentence are important to determine at index 5 which word would make the most sense.
Gotcha.
And that's a thing we as humans do too, and attention reproduces that.
Yeah, like the dog
If
bit me, and like there are sort of like the objects, the words have an action space. There are things they can do. The dog can bite. Who can it bite? Me. Ow. Bad dog. Mean. So one, and tell me if this is going down a path you prefer to stick on this one. But one thing I think is very useful in that idea of a compressed language is because language is a hot topic in many um, fields, and for many good reasons. One of which is obviously AI. Another is sort of 1984. Everyone's obsessed with that. I just love that book. Newspeak, and what if we had fewer amount of words people were allowed to say? Some of which rather good, and let's just get rid of that word. But there are certain words that we don't want to get rid of, like hey, maybe we should be concerned about neo-Nazi, whatever, and then try it. There are we want to make sure that we have some level of freedom of speech and this sort of thing. Not in that direction, but in a different direction, in a very useful sort of like we're trying to communicate. Time is of the essence, and we want to think powerfully and create powerfully, whatever. Not only swearing, although I do think swearing is a component, but kind of just like shoving, just going to the limit, going to the extreme, rather than sort of, like let's pick an evil person out of the hat. Hitler, let's talk about Hitler again. I'm like, no, Hitler, boring. Satan, like let's go to the ontological worst case, or God. Talk a lot about God. Most people are religious. We should probably meet them close to where they are. Otherwise, we'll be as irrelevant as most of science has been in the past many years. But really, what I'm sort of to that argument is that it's much more. Let's find the ontological, the most pristine example of something. So, like in games, like in chess, AlphaGo is not the best, the greatest of all possible worlds chess player. But in checkers, we've actually been able to map out the entire possible game space so that we could literally tie against God in every single game, assuming he doesn't cheat, which, maybe he's a bastard. Who knows? I don't know. So sort of applying those same principles to language, and to be as extreme as we can to push the calculus limits as much as we may in our language. I know you're like, do you have a question? I'm like, do you think that's a terrible idea, or in a fair question was like, what does that look like? What do you mean by that?
I'm not quite sure if a limit of language actually exists. What we see,
or maybe the limit of
in
like individual words, like not just like a nail, an instance of a nail, but the extreme essence of nailness. To find Plato and his Platonist gods and go to war. A war! Pardon if that
war on
deafened.
Platonist gods.
Coming for you, John Conway. So sort of like in the realm of language to find the best means of using it, which is as quick and as deadly as we can wordsmith our ways around. Kind of to cut to the quick, basically.
Which might actually what we try to do with every single science
Hmm.
we invented or discovered, whatever.
Sure.
Because what happens in sciences is we define terms as sharply and as like we narrow it down to the exact concept we are trying to talk about, which isn't really effective in a time
It
sense.
loses usefulness, but it is the most correct. Is that fair to? Yeah.
But it seems to be the case that we need those definitions to actually make language, when we're talking about concepts, as concise as possible. So the process until it's compressed, I don't know if that's what you meant, but
and maybe I mean the least well, gosh, it's such a weird, because like they're both compressed in their own way, their own dimension. Like if there's a dog and be like, dog, I'm not going to be like Cocker Spaniel of the line of, the great Pyrenees, whatever, right? Or like the name and like the species and the weight. I'm just going to say dog because it conveys my point. When I say, when I talk about God or the devil, you might be like, well, which one? I'm like, no, like the idea of a God, the idea of an adversary, of a devil, rather than a particular instance. And I think that's why science is kind of in its own, sort of has its own language and its own way of doing language, and very particularly to each field. But the difference between H2O and H2O2 are very different, but they're very similar. They're not that different, but they're, the one will kill you, the other won't. I think. Pick an example. I don't know. Whereas, gosh, is that getting at your? I mean, I don't even know if we have a confusion.
I'm trying to figure out what you mean by the limit of language, or being as effective as possible.
I guess like using the broadest terms we can when we can. Or this would be one. This is not something I've thought through entirely thoroughly, other than I do think swearing is important, and let's use worst case, best case, worst case. Excuse my words, or diction. I think it's important that we consider like what happens if our infrastructure is attacked, by like a cyber. I don't know if you heard, but just like yesterday or something, a ransomware attack hit the U.S. where I live, and now like half of our gas supply just isn't here, and that's not even worst case. We didn't take into account the worst case, and like, hey, maybe we should upgrade from Windows 7. We didn't, and now we're here.
Or Windows XP for that matter.
Or that one, yeah. I don't know
runs
the
in
details.
Most hospitals in Germany, which is
still
a fucking disaster.
God. Whew. Wow. But sort of like let's just find the most the essence of a thing, the root of a thing, rather than like, for instance, we talked a lot about like the multi-agent problem in China and Bill Gates and AI killing everyone. These are a lot of like worst case examples, whereas like an instance of that might be somebody identity theft or literally stealing $20 out of your wallet, whatever. But like rather than sort of use the language of small instances, find the term that encapsulates all of that. You might use a word like evil or good and things like that, and then if you can actually learn something meaningful about the class, this is a bit like set theory. If you can learn something about the class of all the things that are contained in the name, the language, the word of evil or good, powerful, weak, what have you, then you can know something about all the members of that set, of that class. To where, and that well, yeah. Does that clarify kind of what I mean? AI is an incredibly broad term, but what is, when I think about it, when I talk about it, most of the time it's an artificial general intelligence, a super intelligence, a living, conscious, I was going to say breathing, but not probably, thing. So like the way I attempt to use words is in their most extreme case, the most like meaningful to decision making case. It kind of just cuts out a lot of the confusion. It's like, well, what kind do you mean? I'm like, I mean the most of whatever there may be.
That makes sense if it's clear what the extreme is, but in most cases I can think of there's still a lot of ambiguity in it. Even if you choose to use the most extreme, whatever that in the specific case means, concept or broadest, not broadest, but
I might have just figured it out, because this is a bit of an online double meaning there, discussion on this, where like I don't entirely know what I'm getting at. I just know that I try and do it. So it's kind of like an unconscious thing I'm aware of, but now I'm trying to confabulate some bullshit reason why it's like, no, this is why I should do drugs or do something, whatever. Usefulness, to actually like start at like we have some goal. Now how do we get there? And that there are like certain like if we're doing chemistry or biology, we want the exact thing. We don't want a broad definition. We want the definition. We want 2 moles of oxychloride uranium, something. But if we're, trying to do something that requires a broad definition, we use that definition. Just that we use the optimal terminology at every moment.
And I guess we, as humans, not consciously, but unconsciously, most times language actually isn't that conscious. People just speak or write or whatever. It's a
little freaky.
And in most cases, at least I think in most cases, we actually do that, but it doesn't only depend on our definitions of things, but also on the definition of everybody else you converse. You have conversations with. And because language is fuzzy and there are shifts in meaning all of the time, there are some really fun examples where the meaning completely shifted and the original meaning isn't even really there anymore.
Yeah.
But in
Yeah.
the transition, there is even more of an ambiguity or possibility of ambiguity when you use those words. And that doesn't only happen to words that describe quite specific things, but also concepts. If you,
Sort of
I
like
mean,
words as a dynamic thing that might um, completely completely change meaning to where they have almost no relation to their original naming or usage.
right? In general, language or language is not a set thing, but more of a process. Like everything in the universe seems to be.
Hmm.
There are no things set in stone.
Yeah. Yeah, which is freaky. It's like, whoa, what is that? What does that mean? Like, what do we do with that?
But at each given moment, of course, there can be some kind of a near optimal way of communicating.
Hmm.
But I guess that depends on who you're communicating with. And maybe that even holds for when you're thinking in language and only conversating, having
Yeah, I
conversations
think that's actually a
with
word.
yourself.
It's a weird word, but I think it is. And sort of a jumping off point from there, I think, is like brain computer interfaces where um, not only are you communicating with yourself, but you could be, um, in that sort of headspace that maybe unconscious, maybe whatever it is to think with another person, and that'll be fun. I know there was a I don't even know if it was a paper, but it got picked up by the media where it's like Facebook's AI develops its own language, and it was pretty much like bullshit. But language is a dynamic. Much of the time, it's a dynamic means of communication, and that dynamism of it is wild. I mean, it's wild, and like it's very like you can have like distance is kind of a meaningful idea of like Spanish is not that different from English, whereas languages like Icelandic and like whatever Native Americans language is called, I don't know, don't get mad at me, but was used in World War II because it had no root in the English or Latin, Greek root languages. So like the mapping was just like not clear at all. Um, and that's why I think it's fun to like is there a root of language and how does like math, metaphysics, and all that enter that process? Just
I
such
guess
crazy
that's
stuff.
a concept Noam Chomsky to find universals among different language families
Would you say
and
would you say that again? Because I
formalize
just
it.
showed something on the screen that I will need to cut out. So Noam Chomsky did a thing. Say that
Universal
again.
grammar.
Universal. Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. What is
Which
that?
led to a whole interesting bunch of discoveries or formalizations, like, for example, formal languages, in which are quite important for computer science, I would
Hmm.
argue, or
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's apparent,
Yeah.
are a more or less direct result of his findings when dealing with universals of language, or universal grammar, as he
Interesting.
called it.
That seems similar, and tell me if this is no relation or a lot. I love the story of, I think, Alan Turing was like literally in one of Bertrand Russell's, or okay, Alan Turing was in somebody's class. It might have been Bertrand Russell. Who was the language guy? Whatever. Maybe. Oh, it was Wittgenstein. I think it was Wittgenstein. He was in Alan Turing was in Wittgenstein's class. I'm almost certain, and
Wait,
basically was like, this guy's a quack. What the fuck is he talking about? You can absolutely have a formal language that allows you to compute all possible computable things Turing completeness and whatever. And then obviously went on to defeat the Enigma machine. Welcome back to that. And to create the first real computers and be the father of literally computation. Pretty good one on a resume there. But that kind of, it's almost like people like Noam Chomsky are sort of like proving what Alan Turing did is actually what it claims to be. That it really is, that you can have a formal language system be complete, if I'm understanding you correctly, because I have not read Noam Chomsky's tidbit on that, or tidbit. Maybe it's a huge class of stuff. A broad swath of work.
I mean, some people argue he's the father of modern linguistics, modern
I think everyone does.
NLP,
Guy's a legend.
and he did all that, and in his second half of his life spent a lot of time on politics, which is crazy how much that guy did in different fields.
Yeah, that's something I'm trying to personally navigate. I'm not the greatest of all possible anything, and much of the time to try and diversify is to fail, right? Like if you want to do PhD research, you got to pick a topic. You need to be the best in that topic, or contribute meaningfully. And I'm not sure how like healthy that is. Both like well, I don't really care about personally, but like the sort of like solutions that we need seem to be very to require a lot of components from different fields. And so I'm wondering if sort of that Noam Chomsky way of not staying in your lane could be really successful, like kind of career-ish wise.
Not only careerish wise, also for the main thing you aim for, when you're dealing with some rather narrow scientific question, for example. I think one story about Einstein shows that because he worked in when he worked on special relativity or general relativity. Special relativity is the thing that first came out, right?
I think so. That sounds correct.
I'm
a nerd, but I'm not an expert.
The key idea he had, or the puzzle piece that wasn't there yet, he found when working in the
patent office, or
patent office, right?
Okay, yeah. Don't mean to put words in your mouth. I think I know that one.
Yeah, and obviously he got some inspiration from doing something completely different than he actually worked on. And I think that happens quite often with great ideas.
So I would say that's an instance of that sort of like broad kind of aggressive use of language being just like necessary for that kind of, because basically what he was looking for did not exist in his lexicon, right? Like the idea that time and space are not constant, or I'm not an expert, but that they're not what we think they are. The sort of words for that don't exist in the context of the words that have been constructed for that thing. So he needed to go outside of kind of what was known, discussed, whatever, to get there. So my sort of nugget of truth that I'm extracting from that is that let's be as broad. I think like philosophy is useful, but then also another kind of example of that is like artificial intelligence researchers should talk to comedians, which they're doing more and more. I think is healthy. But yeah, that sort of breadth is vital for both language and just also just generally practically, and is not at all a component built in to either academia or industry. So it's like, hey, we have this thing that we know is necessary, and we actively have structures in place to not have that happen, which is not only bad, but is also kind of insane.
I think the main thing is it works
Well, that's a lot.
when you have a streamlined expectation of the next steps, the next scientific steps.
Mm-hmm.
But for the big ideas, the big discoveries, the big scientific things in general, you need creativity, and creativity is, at least in humans, only possible with a really broad input. Like you need to experience a lot of things, and your brain processes them, and whatever it actually does, I don't know. I'm not an expert on creativity, but it seemingly takes cores or features of seemingly unrelated things and somehow processes it so that a new thing, or you can, how do I put it? Yeah, it combines features of different seemingly unrelated areas into a new idea.
Mm-hmm. And that it is a new, like it's not just, because this is kind of my problem with Platonism as an idea, is it sort of cheapens the work of creativity. It's like, oh, well, all you did is put two ideas together. And it's like, yes, but like, do you realize, how most mutations, most ideas put together are terrible ideas and end up in death or worse. A pandemic, for instance. But so that, but then also that the combination of these two things can be a totally new thing and have very little, like it's, for instance, salt, right? Like you can't eat chlorine, that'll kill you. You can't eat sodium, it'll explode. Salt, NaCl, the combination of those two, masterpiece. And if anyone's curious, little plug for this. Oh my god, it's so good. It's honestly just a lot of salt, but damn, it's good. Yeah, so I think you're right, and I think it's a bigger, just the combining of ideas is a much more powerful thing than it's often phrased as. Basically is what I'm saying.
And maybe it's even, it might make sense informationally, because it seems to be something that at least is related to things like transfer learning. Creativity seems to capture
I
some
remember.
core properties.
Yes! I was going to ask you about the multimodal neuron! That's why I pulled up, because I was like, what was I going to... Because I remembered, I forgot, and now we're here. Transfer learning, multimodal. Go, Max. Go. Sorry, it was driving me mad, obviously. Back to you. Back to you. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Where was I going?
Transfer learning.
Because what transfer learning does in AI and also in humans, we capture the essence of one thing or information information structures in one thing that can be transferred, transfer learning,
Yeah.
to another concept, and something similar seems to happen in creativity. Of course, this doesn't always work out, and creative thought often results in some pretty dumb and shitty ideas. But when we combine cores or concepts from one thing that actually work in another thing, it just works. I mean, and that does seem to have something to do with reality in and of itself. Things are basically have a informational structure, and things are similar in some way or another sometimes. And when they are, you can, or you might be able to transfer
My head goes to
concepts.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Basically, transfer concepts. I'm not quite sure.
Sure. So what? Here's where my head went. It went to Magic the Gathering because I'm a nerd. Nerds. Maybe you're not a nerd, and you should be because we have the most fun. But the reason I bring this up is, I think you said the word concept, but sort of like an attribute, a component of a thing, right? The nail has sharpness, it has hardness, it has quite literally like measures of brittleness and melting point and all this sorts of bullshittery. But I think one of the ways that sort of that ends up in the useful space is, let's say you have some problem. You have a picture you need to hang on the wall. You have a tire that needs air. And you sort of look at your set of tools, perhaps words, and you say, what has sharpness? A knife has sharpness. An axe has sharpness. A quick wit has sharpness. And in the case of like Magic the Gathering, you might be playing a certain deck called Jund, which is my favorite, where you kind of can start with like certain points where it's like, all right, this is our win condition, Tarmogoyf. And, all it needs is a bit of removal. Well, what's really good removal? Oh, these are the best, and sort of you're able to, there are tens of thousands of different Magic cards. But really, in like the Jund archetype for like your goal of winning, there's about 50, probably less. It's like you need Lightning Bolt, you need Thoughtseize, and you need Liliana because she's the queen, and that's it because they have that attribute of removal, which you need. The multimodal neuron from Clip, Dolly, OpenAI, very recent paper. Haven't done a video on it because I'm a piece of scum. I will because I just can't stop thinking about it. But it's really the first time that AI has truly transferred learning in this way, like transferred knowledge in this way, and in a very condensed, very broad sense, where it's really kind of for the first time created a word. And the two examples they give are Halle Berry, that in the human mind, like there are literal neurons for, pick your favorite actress, actor, Brad Pitt or whatever. And in their neural network, they checked for Spider-Man because nerds. And Halle Berry played Catwoman. So sticking with the comic book world, and was able to detect. I'm kind of overview. I know you know all this stuff a bit, but Spider-Man as like the picture, like a literal picture of Spider-Man, whether it be from the movie, you got a Spider-Man 3 doing a little sexy dance, or like the written, somebody wrote in like text Spider-Man. Maybe could even detect his theme song. I don't know. But that sort of thing is brand new. It's been out for like 2-ish months or less. And I guess much of what we're talking about is like the implications of like how big a deal is that? Because it's, as we've been thoroughly over, is quite fundamental to communication, to existence, all this sort of stuff. And if you're able to do that sort of thing efficiently, whoa! How much are we looking more like the Matrix than Blade Runner? Just like, are we closer to artificial general intelligence than we were originally thinking?
I think these multimodal neurons touch exactly on the topic of having a concept of what a thing is.
Yeah.
Which we talked about a lot in these past few hours, 2 hours.
Whenever you gotta go, say the word.
No.
I insist we talk about multimodal neurons. I insist. You are held captive for the time being. Kidding.
But if it's an efficient way, and it seems to be, because, I mean, if it wouldn't be, I don't think humans and their language...
Or animals, yeah.
Or
interesting.
Culture wouldn't be such a big thing, because we need those concepts in human societies, and being able to talk about these concepts, communicate those concepts to others, to actually build something like culture in the most basic sense.
Sure.
When we first found out that we could use sticks for I don't know what, but
sure.
And it is the very first time that an artificial neural network seemingly really learned not only to detect that this has this type of label, and those are different things. Two things have the same label, and we can have, if we have enough weights, we can have specific weights for that. But really one cell or one layer, or I don't know how it's actually formally
I think it's a single neuron, which is, don't quote me on that. It is in a human, like it's a single neuron, but in the neural net, it could be like a clump. I'm pretty sure it's a single neuron though. Like it's like, this is the Spider-Man neuron, but it can also like do so other too, shit, which is.
I think so too, but it's
weird.
I'm not quite sure. But the main point is we have a representation of whatever Spider-Man means, and not only because of arbitrary numbers of weights that can capture edge cases, but in a
great point.
Wow. Intelligent way, whatever that actually means. And there's a great paper on intelligence with just, I think, 42 definitions
Hey,
of what intelligence is.
no way. That's awesome. Feel free to share that if you remember.
I will.
That's really 42, of course. Fucking nerds, man. Interesting. And then Francois Chollet comes and he's like, no, intelligence is... I can't do his accent, obviously, but intelligence is the G factor, or whatever he... no slight on him, but not sure I totally am in his camp. Again, I think a big part of intelligence is existence, aka power. Power is vital to instantiate your intelligence. I digress. Yes, your point that it's not just a lot of the criticisms of GPT-3. Oh, well, it's just so big. They threw so much money at it, millions of dollars. So it's actually just memorizing in edge cases, which there are some, that's not entirely untrue. There are a lot of components of that are correct. But, especially in clip, dolly, multimodal neurons, it does seem to be efficient, and it's like, no, like, this is Spider-Man. He's a meaningful member of our society. He's a word worth remembering, worth a concept, a person. Is he human? I mean, is he fully human? He's half spider. I don't know. What a shitty example. But I would guess someone like Clayface might not have as rigorous or Wheelman. They're weird bad guys and good guys in comic books. But somebody like Batman or presidents and famous people do. But, somebody, such as myself or whoever, that was only mentioned once in like the training data, I would be, I think, fair to say that probably don't get as much memory allocated to them. So is memory the right? I don't know. Well, what do you think are the implications for something like this? And then we can wrap up, because it's very late where you are. You are in Germany.
It's all right. We have a public holiday tomorrow, so.
Hey, right. Woohoo. Nice.
I think, first of all, one thing that we seem to forget with those large language models, of course, they have their problems, but one part of it might be that the way these architectures are not optimal for the thing we're trying to process, in that case language, and on the other hand, our brains, for example, are orders of magnitude larger in computing capability, in number of neurons, connections than even those really big and
great point,
expensive models. And
wow, that's weird. And it's possible, it's funny, I should probably know the answer to this, that it's not so much the, because like a human neuron is much slower than a transistor or an individual neuron in a neural net. But the amount of connections, the entanglement, there's a delightful paper that am slowly rereading, because it's one of those ideas that I think will change the world, by Jeffrey Hinton, our good friend. Which just that entanglement's really important for intelligence, and is kind of its own form of compression, but not really. It's wild. It's a different thing. But that sort of like the massive amount of connections we have, even though they're kind of slow, might be a big part in intelligence, and particularly creativity. Hashtag big brain plays.
And we see that there are actual better ways to process the data, as in the clip multimodal neurons thing. So if we combine those newer these advancements in certain areas of not only natural language processing, but in general information processing in AI with bigger models. Okay, there's also there might also be problems because not every concept, as we know, or every type of architecture is really scalable.
True.
But if they are something like a multimodal neuron, or I try to think about how something similar only in the language space would look like, that we no that actually doesn't make a lot of sense, because it would mean that we have neurons for each word, which
I see what you're saying.
is not
I see what you're saying.
really an option for language
that's
processing.
actually not, because to your point earlier, most of conversation is unconscious, and a lot of words are kind of just filler, you know, and like the actual substance of a sentence could be, could exclude most articles, and the word isn't even really a word most of the time. It's just like a sound to convey, I have more to say. But you're not going to say, I have more to say. You're going to say, you know. And that of like importance of like there are some subjects and concepts that you need to have a very deep and rich understanding of, and there are others you don't need to know really at all. And that depends on what it is that you're doing. My favorite example is forget which story this is particularly, but Sherlock Holmes doesn't know some famous something or other, but he's like, I can tell you every, just by the ashes in this ashtray, I know exactly which tobacco this is and which shop it was bought in, or something like that. Because for his field as a detective, that's the shit he's got to know. And that you can't be an expert in everything. You can't contain it all, right? Like most of our
Unfortunately not.
Say again.
Unfortunately not.
Unfortunately
the
not.
times of universal scholars are over, most likely.
Yeah.
At least for humans.
Yeah, and that is kind of what's exciting about the idea of like a super intelligence, is like, what if, Leonardo da Vinci never died and didn't have capacity constraints, like could have just kept learning and learning and creating without end. Like, that'd be pretty sick. Which is one of the reasons I think we should get rid of death, because then we'd have people like him and Einstein and Aristotle and Socrates still around, and holy shit, who would they be today? Goodness. I don't know.
But in some way, most of us, if we are somewhat educated, have a lot more resources than these universal scholars had, and even more knowledge, even though we don't contain it in our brain, and it's a good thing. We don't have to contain it in our brain, but we can pull out our, where is my phone?
Yeah,
our
somewhere.
small little device and um, basically look the not quite the whole knowledge of the world, but the important
More than
things.
we could ever consume, certainly. I do say, though, that I think that is absolutely true, but it is kind of overblown a little bit. For instance, I mentioned that entanglement paper by Hinton, and I think there are certain things that you need to have in your head deeply, and you need to like really process, like the fact that China is doing a genocide against their own people, and they're the second most powerful combination of humans ever. You need to get that to sink in. Like you need to believe that in every fiber of your being, and not just China. The United States has been heavily involved. We're aware. Fauci's a great guy. What are you talking about? What do you mean Bill Gates wants to do a genocide? What do you mean? I digress. But there are certain things that need to be part of your mind far beyond sort of a disconnected, disentangled thing.
But maybe to some extent, this might actually be solvable in better education systems. We shouldn't teach people facts. We should teach people concepts and problem solving. And of course, not everybody is going to be an Einstein or Aristotle.
But a lot more people could be.
Or at least push in that direction. And that would be great for us as a species.
Mm-hmm. So,
and probably the planet, because we would think more about the consequences with, for example, climate change or political conflicts or you name it.
Anything. All things. So that's because, like, the fact of what you just said is true. And it's not what we see. And I think that is largely artificial, that it is constructed that way because it's better for whoever is in the front runner. This is not to shit, this is a general concept, not shitting on anyone in particular. This is not anti-capitalist or pro, whatever. I think this is something that emerges always or most of the time at least. And in particular, like some like university system and research has not gone the way that it should have, could have. What is your estimation of the state of the world as far as freedom and control go? It's been coming to my attention further and further how little freedom we have and how much control companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, China, United States, etc. have.
That is a broad question and
yes,
a difficult one.
Yeah.
To some extent, I think we have to not push ourselves to be too pessimistic, because at least in the last, 500 years, almost every parameter of that is somewhat measurable.
I think that's Pinker again.
In those regards, the world got better. We have less hunger, less people dying of small diseases, less war, less crime in general.
Sure.
More
Which
people
I just two
are
quick points, if I may interject. I know I'm interrupting, but I think that's maybe more of like a, wow, it was really shitty, less than, or more that, like, wow, it used to be really shitty, than, hey, it's great now. It's like, no, just like in comparison to that, it's better, but I don't know. and that it should, where it should be, we should be on goddamn Mars by now. Come on, let's do some fun shit. We haven't solved cancer yet? Really? Come on. Get your shit together. Psychology is still in the shitty state it's in. The brain is not that complicated. Come on. And to shit on our own field, AI could be further along, probably. But then, that's one thing. The other was something. I forgot what it was. Shit. Okay. Back to you. I know I interrupted intentionally. So, things are better than they have been. The other part I was just going to say is that, like, the likelihood that continues is 0. Whether that be climate change, where, like, a lot of what we've been doing is going into debt, both literally financially, but also climately, where it's like we cannot continue fossil fuel, etc., at the rate we've been going, and that we've been sort of building up a deficit in that sense.
And the only
so it's a bubble, basically.
Fighting chance we have is to work on these problems, and they may be harder than any problem before in human history, or any problems before in human history. But do we really have a choice? Not even trying to work on these problems is basically species suicide on the long term.
Do you mean just like climate collapse, or do you mean politically? Is that even the word? Control. What do you mean particularly? Like what are the problems you're thinking of?
I mean, climate change is the most apparent one, but of course, also stuff like nuclear weapons are not off the table.
I always forget about this.
It is still a problem, and maybe even more than it ever was.
Definitely. Look at North Korea. Holy fuck, man. God. Damn.
Not even states like North Korea. If you look at the conflict between India and Pakistan, if they don't have as much. They don't have as much nuclear weapons as you might think. Or, I mean, they don't have as many nuclear weapons than other states, other nations. But if they, whichever might lead to that, fire all of their nuclear arsenal at each other, we're fucked as a species. Our planet is fucked.
Just those two?
Yeah. Because of the... I can't remember exactly what it was. It was nuclear fallout and nuclear winter.
That one. Yeah.
And alone, the
that lasts for so long, too. It's like hundreds to thousands of years, I think. It's been a while.
And it pushes up so much dust that we have basically a few years of winter. And let's be frank, let's be honest. We as a species, as civilization, we would not
like we would
handle that.
Continue existing, but it'd be like 98% extinction or death, mortality, whatever. Because, like, we're so far above our carrying capacity right now. I think that's true. I don't know if that's correct. We have to be, though. Like, or we're damn close. Just with, like, what we're able to do with technology and GMOs and fertilizers. Whatever. God, yeah, that's the whole nuclear thing is such like a ticking time bomb. Good joke. That never went away and is still... As your point, like more present maybe than it's ever been, with no clear solution to like how we deal with that. Which one could make a case for globalism, How do you solve the multi-agent problem? Make sure there's only one agent. How do you solve the nuclear not arms race, standoff, whatever? Make sure there's no standoff. How do you do that? You're not going to take everyone's nukes, but maybe you take everyone's everything. And that's sort of where some of the movers and shakers' actions over the past year and I guess like a half-ish now, one could argue, and I might, have that feeling to them. Obviously, most obviously is China, but then also some of these multinational corporations that are, they're just, it's really hard to understand really what they are, what they will become, and how powerful they are in a political sense because they're able to cover their own tracks and that sort of thing. Google, Facebook, Amazon, etc. So, what do we want? What's optimal when thinking about extinction? Because I'm not sure it's a bunch, and these are questions, okay? I don't know. So anybody who's like, he's whatever, I'm not. I'm asking questions. I don't fucking know, and I don't think, I probably propose no one does, but like the bunch of individual nation states with nuclear weapons, law of large numbers, time goes on, we kill ourselves just with the nuclear thing. It's like, oh, well, let's just denuclearize. Okay, you go first. It's not an option. Or do we intentionally, rationally enter into a monoculture, 1984 style, a bunch of pseudo wars, Oceania versus Eurasia, flip it again. It's going to be a slave state. Like, there's no way it's not that, but it's not extinction. So it buys us time to figure out these problems of the dog-eat-dog thing, when then we don't have to have that, and we can actually try and make true artificial general intelligence. And it's a lot of shit. It's what keeps me up at night. So, thoughts, Mr. Max?
My hope still would be that we don't have to, at least for the time, until we have solutions for these problems, real solutions for these problems.
Final solution? I just can't help but like freak out.
No.
It's all a joke. Calm down. Trying to not lose our marbles.
Until we have had enough time to figure out solutions, maybe we should focus on forcing collaboration as much as possible, because
some of that makes a fucking lot of sense. Like Paris Accords, I think, is a successful example of that. Is that kind of what you mean, or maybe not?
Not exactly the Paris Accord, because
I don't know a lot about this.
Most nations don't give a shit about it. And
okay, fair.
Actually producing more greenhouse gases and...
Okay, maybe terrible example. I don't know.
But international collaboration, although it's fragile and might not be the optimal solution, seems to be the only solution for now, right now, without entering open conflict with, for example, China, or even other actors, like not actors in the
sure.
Film sense.
Yeah. Movers and shakers.
And of course, there is some open conflict. But if we, with Facebook, Google, and so on. Facebook, I think, was it in the U.S. Congress, U.S. Senate, the proposal to break up Facebook?
It'll never happen. Or it'll.
I
I don't think it'll ever happen.
I don't think so too.
The United States is made up of a bunch of monopolies right now. It's my understanding. I'm not. Whatever.
But I think really the only strategy to actually being able to maybe develop solutions is until then cooperate thoughtfully without, for example, giving China too much power, which happened the last, like, I don't know, when did China open up? To the,
I don't know. I mean, roughly like
economy?
the last 70 years, they've just been like, and now.
Yeah, but
maybe thinking of something.
What I meant was when they opened up to the world economy and participated in it again.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was like a moment.
Isn't that long ago? Might be something
I think
around
you're right.
35 years, maybe?
Something like that, where they were like, what if we did a bit of free market stuff?
And the hope of the West was that they just see that it's the better system and adopt freedom.
Yeah. And now it's like,
human rights.
Oh, actually, they have the better system. We should be. Cause I feel like this is the rational conclusion where it's like, oh, China figured it out. Everyone else is idiots. Like, do free market and capture all of the gains. Don't have free speech. That's a horrible idea. And don't pay your employees any more than is necessary. AKA close to slave labor, or actually slave labor as you can get.
And as long as we still have some economic power or edge over China, we maybe should use it to force China to really cooperate and not undermine our institutions.
Our institutions are undermined, though? And we're delving a little bit in. I'm fully aware that, like, I don't think this is necessarily conspiracy, but this is inference. Like, we don't have these things as facts. But we do.
In some cases, we do have it as facts. In Africa, certainly, for example, where they literally own, in some regions, the rights to all, what is the word? Lithium and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that whole
rare metal,
rare earth metals and whatever, cobalt, Fakongo. I didn't know that. Huh. But for instance, like Eric Schmidt with the movements of the. So one video I covered was like the United States is not taking artificial intelligence seriously. Meanwhile, literally everyone else, it's their number one concern, both like countries and companies. And Eric Schmidt, previous CEO of both Google and Alphabet, 33rd richest person alive. He's heading the United States like organization for AI. And what's weird is like that organization is saying like, oh, the government can't, like, we're not going to take this seriously. That's what that video was about. Time goes on. And as I shared with you, OpenAI now has a new member on the board who is currently a congressman or whatever, but previously was in the CIA. Huh. Interesting. And, you know, there are many different collaborations between big United States, companies such as Microsoft just doing massive Department of Defense, Pentagon sort of deals, just having a lot to do with, and I'm trying to both put the pieces together reasonably rationally, as well as not, confabulate too much and see demons where there are none. But, sorry, somebody's moving and shaking outside. Yeah, I guess it seems to me that sort of like, they might become co-opted. I'm like, kind of feel like we're there. Kind of feel like the game is sort of over in a way. Where it's like, no, we don't want free speech, we want control. That's way better. And that seems to be evident. And I'm really trying to figure out, like, okay, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for the future? And how do we do research that A, could also get published, but then B, could be meaningful. A lot of parameters, a lot of constraints. And any general response on that? I mentioned that to you the other day, and it does feel very, like, paranoid, I recognize.
I mean, I don't know the actual relationship or the actual positions he had in the CIA, which beliefs he has on national security or whatever, and what his position actually means for OpenAI.
Sure. And to be clear, like, the reason that, we're putting different pieces together, because I'm not sure any one of these, some congressman joins OpenAI to help on policy. Of course, that's a great idea. But that in combination with a lot of these other things seems to add up to more than the sum of its parts. And seems to have a direction that fits in line with, the Great Reset and that kind of remaking the world in a more Chinese surveillance state structure.
But isn't, like, surveillance a thing, especially conservatives across nations always wanted? I mean, I know that there's a big discussion in the US on that, but also here in Germany, every 2 years, some politician thinks it's and mostly conservative or right-wing politicians think it's a good idea to have a net of cameras everywhere in public spaces. And I mean, that goes in the direction of general surveillance.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say that that's occasionally a partisan thing on one side or the other. Like, a lot of left, liberal, whatever, I don't care, are arguing for that as well, because you can make a case for it on either side. And kind of the point is that if you're the powerful class, you don't give a shit about politics, you care about power. Oh, whoops, my bad. I don't know why that happened. And so, a lot of these discussions are kind of, I don't know how real they are, where it's like, obviously, like, extreme surveillance state, such as what China's doing, totally apart from the communism aspect. It's like, no, like, they're just doing control. Ignore communism for a second. Like, let's just worry about the big elephant dragon, whatever, in the room. The Chinese dragon is such a cool. Hey, I have one here. Look at that. Da da da. I don't know if it's Chinese, maybe it's Japanese. Who knows? It's pretty. But just that I think it's a bit apolitical. But it's definitely, there are arguments, there are discussions around it, but we're already there. Like, this has listened to everything we've said. Your phone has heard everything I've said. I guess you're wearing headphones. But, I'll upload this to YouTube, and if YouTube, the company, doesn't like the vein that this fits into, it will not get publicized. Which is not to say that it, won't get publicized because it's shitty content. This is a possibility as well. Not stating that's an impossibility. But they already have control. Everything you say and largely think can be inferred from your internet fingerprint or footprint, whatever. And then back to the, Donald Trump, regardless of him as a political whatever, he's a famous person who now kind of isn't very much. And he was like one of the most of all time. And, these private companies have that power globally. Huh.
And I think that's an important point, because these companies should have to decide if they are a closed space or a utility.
They have. Like, they don't want to be utility because then they, have to answer to anybody. If they're like this like amorphous fusion with government, and maybe even like sort of more like parasitic, where they're sort of like taking over a lot of that control, then nothing changes and they get control. I don't want to say infinite, but seemingly without limit, which I guess is different.
The consequence of it being a closed entity, whatever, would be that it should be regulated in a certain kind of way. So, for example,
it should
Facebook
be, but it never will be.
Right.
Because, like, Facebook, they're the number one lobbyist. Yes, that's true. They're the number one lobbyist. They spend the most money on the United States government. You're going to vote against their propositions? They pay your bills. They buy you that yacht. They take you on those nice lunches. I think another great example, which is one of those things you learn about, you're like, wow, that is the world we live in. This is shocking, is you're allowed to trade stocks, at least in the United States, as a senator, congressman, I don't know about president, but that doesn't make any sense on like any level that you would allow that. Is that ever going to change? No. Said another way, there is no incentive for somebody with that income stream, which is millions, probably billions. You have no incentive to change that, and you have a fucking lot of incentive to keep that system going. And that's a nonpartisan thing, and that seems to be the case as well with, power wants more power.
I think
feedback loop thing.
Politics in the US works quite differently than it works in, for example, Germany or across the EU, for example.
For now.
Maybe because we have more than two parties. I don't know.
Do you?
Yeah.
Like two, like legit, like any of these guys could win, or gals, or what have you?
Yeah, we have some elections coming up this September.
What?
And it actually might happen that the Green Party gets the chancellor position, which is, I think, unthinkable in US.
Has never happened and probably never will.
I mean, you had some changes with the Whig Party and stuff like that, but you never really had more than two or three parties.
Definitely never more than three, that's for damn sure. Interesting.
And, I mean, currently there are...
more than three?
Let me count. There's this CDU, CSU. That's a weird. Bavaria has its own conservative party, which is also a whole other thing.
Why the hell not?
Social Democrats, Green Party, Left Party, Liberal Party, and relatively new right-wing party. So we have six
Wow.
parties in the.
And like the votes are like roughly evenly distributed, just like roughly. I don't mean like perfectly.
No, I mean the Conservatives are at the moment the largest fraction.
But
And that's why Angela Merkel is chancellor. She's from the Conservative Party, and we have coalitions in our political system. So I think the last time it happened that one party could govern alone was in the 50s or something.
wow,
it was a long time ago. They always had to
very different. The most
go
different
into
period.
coalitions with other parties, so there had to be some kind of, and still has to be some kind of compromise, common ground between parties. And of course, lobbyisms. Sorry?
Oh, go ahead. That's just fascinating, is all I'm saying. Like, whoa.
Lobbyism, of course, still is a thing and a big problem in Germany too, and for that matter, probably in most countries. But I think the possibility for change and for different ideologies and incentives to actually change something might be bigger here than it is with yours political system, two-party system. But I'm not sure about that. I mean, I know a bit about
there is,
American
I think
system.
Another interesting component of, we have all these options, and it's the illusion of choice. You vote for blue, you vote red, and it results in the same thing. This is similar to like, the deep state. It's like, no, it's just like nothing's going well. In part, it is that where like there are some components of the government that just never rotate. Not any sort of like, conspiracy. Just like, no, like, we have the same Department of Defense in this sort of thing. But then more particularly, or not more particularly, but another aspect of that is there really that much substantive difference between the parties? And I don't know yours, but in the United States, I would propose no.
I think your political landscape is actually, from a European standpoint, it's pretty conservative. Even the so-called Liberal Party is, in European terms, I mean, basically you have two conservative parties from a European point of view. And something you would call a socialist like Bernie Sanders, which is actually, I mean, people use it as an insult against Bernie. He would be not that far left in Europe. He would be a social democrat and not even a extreme left-wing one. And besides social democrats, we have another party with some neo-Stalinists and crazy people in part.
It's a hard argument to make.
They are there.
They're out there, sure.
But
it's probably easier than.
And even they have seats in the parliament, so it's the landscape is broader.
Yeah,
political
but
landscape.
Don't because on the world stage, the United States and China are like they're so much weightier than literally any other country, I believe. And I don't say this in any sort of nationalist way. I don't really give a shit. But finding enemies, or not enemies, but opportunities, I'll say, outside of your borders makes a lot of money, makes a lot of power. And I guess I'm really sort of, in a language sense, trying to get myself to understand and to plan, what do we do with the fact that the two biggest players on the planet are seemingly not necessarily they're doing what the fuck they want, and no one's getting in their way. And there are arguments for that being a good thing, right? Like, we got to get on the same page about climate change. We got to get the same page about artificial intelligence and many other things. There will be eggs broken along the way, for instance. And that's an unavoidable consequence, legitimately. But also, they're definitely doing some things that are not so great. Like, both those two countries funded research that could have resulted in the coronavirus, and are continuing to do so. Like, they're spending, like, the United States is spending $1.2 billion to do more of that kind of research. It's like, regardless of whether, the truth value of that possibility, we should not do more of it, and we're going to do much more of it. It's like, that doesn't seem responsible at the minimum. So, and then, it's like, okay, well, maybe that's the case. That, we have these two big players, or one player, whatever. What do we do about it? Can we, is voting a meaningful thing? No, it hasn't been for a very long time. And if it is a meaningful thing in your society, well, then that's kind of stupid. And if they were rational, they would take a hint from the rest of the world and be like, oh, we need to make sure voting is as you got to go out and vote. We got to make it this, it's a duty, because duties don't have to have any meaningful impact. You just got to feel good about them and part of your community. And then the powers that be do whatever the fuck they want. And then they take over the world. That's the rational move. Perhaps. You look incredibly convinced.
I think it might seem like the rational thing for those in power, but on the long run, it turned out to be, and still turns out to be, not so much rational. I mean...
But they're the most powerful, right? What are you optimizing for?
Does that really matter when they are destroying themselves in the process? Like, even those big players are not really doing something about, for example, climate change. And I'm pretty sure they too don't know when what's the word? Inflection point?
Yeah, threshold, I think.
Yeah, right.
Inflection point, yeah. Or threshold. Yes. I digress.
Where the inflection point or threshold is how much more CO2 and other greenhouse gases we can pump into our atmosphere without it being really catastrophic. And we see those consequences a bit more each year. The Rhine River here in Germany wasn't, you couldn't drive ships? What do you do with ships?
Sail?
I don't know. With big...
Do you mean like
container ships?
Yeah, container ships.
Sailing.
Thank you. I couldn't find it either.
You couldn't drive them through the Rhine, which is one of the most important
goodness
waterways, whatever, shipping ways in general. because it had not enough water, because
Wow.
the summer was too hot. And I mean, this happened 2 years in a row. This is a real consequence of climate change happening right now. And
Wow.
nobody is really doing something about it. So maybe only having power is not the rational move, but
But
using this power rationally too.
kind of in line with game theory, but then in particular with like 1984, and this is like really my concern with sort of what we're seeing is, are the institutions, the people in control, smart? Are they sort of greedy enough? Are they transhumanists or just, fucking idiotic eugenicists? Let's hope. Well, in China's case, yes. But 1984 case, you don't need to be generally powerful. You don't need to inhabit the universe. You don't need to take to the stars and develop quantum computing and artificial intelligence. You just need to make sure everyone else is under your thumb. And then you are a king of reality, because reality, in this understanding, is in people's minds. I don't ascribe to that way of thinking, but I understand how someone could. In China's case, it's got some vibes that way. Whatever. So that's one example where, like, you're the king of shit. You're the rat king. I don't know. You're king of a shitty situation is the point. But then another possibility is that, and this has some merit. Like, this is kind of how I'm directing my life, because I think this is probably the most likely outcome, is that we don't solve climate change and we don't get to Mars. So hopefully we can upload our mind that doesn't need to breathe, that doesn't need to procreate, so we don't have to worry about microplastics and gender issues either. Which is super dark, but I think that might be our only option, to where, it's like, are we going to save the planet? No, we're going to figure out how to make AI and just, not kind of like WALL-E or whatever, where it's like, yeah, the planet's going to get fucked. Whatever. I mean, I just don't... That seems the trajectory we are on. Potentially, we've already crossed the inflection point. We won't know when we do, if we haven't already. So I'm sort of playing with that in mind. But that is the more pessimistic of the directions, certainly.
If we want to be hopeful, and most times I try to be, although rationally there's sometimes not much reason to be hopeful. I think one thing the whole coronavirus COVID thing showed, that when there's an actual problem and everybody notices it and sees it as a problem in the world, we are capable to solve. I mean, it's not quite over with COVID, but we are somewhat capable of solving things incredibly fast. Those vaccines that are some of the most effective in human history in terms of their what's the word?
Effectiveness? Oh, development time?
Yeah, they are incredibly effective for the virus, or the illness, preventing the illness the virus causes, because our body can produce antigens and all that stuff. But also in less than a year, which is...
But again, like, back to the... I think it's Pinker. Someone's going to be mad at me if I'm wrong. But It's like, oh, things are better than they've ever been. This vaccine's, we can develop it faster than ever before. It's just because our baseline was so low. Like, it still took us a year. If this was like smallpox or even, just the normal SARS, like 15% mortality rate, a year goes by, we are fucked because so much of our society is so propped up. It's in debt and not just monetarily. Like, our systems are not constructed. A ransomware attack. Really? Really, Grandma? Half of, like, where I live, a pretty, the United States, wealthiest country of all time. Oh, whoops, we forgot to update our computers. I guess we just don't have gasoline. Because that's fine. So, like, I get your point. But plan for the worst case and hope for the best case. Because previous generations have not planned for the worst case. They didn't plan at all, mostly. Like, we've known climate change is something we should stop for a very long time and didn't. Or fossil fuels particularly. We've known gain-of-function gene editing was a horrible idea. What happened? Well, we went around all those little hurdles and did it anyway. You and I, artificial intelligence, we are quite aware of the dangers. Both present and future. Present as in surveillance, slave states, and the enabling of things ancient dictators could never have dreamed of, which are real now. Nuclear weapons. We've gotten so lucky, shockingly lucky. Luck does not persist. That's not a thing luck does. Based in statistics. There are outliers, but some outliers, you're cheating. We see you. So, we definitely need to take some bit of either to learn to love dark humor to keep ourselves sane, which is the method I'm taking, or to be an optimist despite all evidence.
Or a mix of both.
Or a mix of both. Absolutely. A hybrid system. An ensemble. Delightful. Well, Max, I have kept you for quite a long time. This has been delightful. I'm so glad to have met you, and I'm glad that Germany is 6 parties? That's crazy. That's crazy. I'm still like, what? Any parting thoughts, questions, fun facts, show and tell, whatever?
I think we should, as not final words, that's...
Yeah. Do you want to We're very lighthearted here. Very, very uplifting.
Lighting up the conversation is also a good thing to end with, but I think I don't want to sound like a blind optimist, but I think despite all problems and the possibility that they might not be solvable or solvable in time, we should at least try.
Oh, fuck yeah. Never tell me the odds. Yes, I shot first. Yeah, totally agree. There's, you ever played Dota? Okay, well there's
I'm not a big video games guy. I was as a child, but now sometimes I play stuff like Civilization.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who
aside from
love that game. Goodness, they violently love that game. Sure. Well, the example I was going to use is there's a character named Techies who basically, like, the game you can't end the game. And it's a game, like Dota is a game you can't quit, you can't surrender. And so you just have to play on. And like the game can go for like an hour and a half. and you can't, and you're stuck with your teammates, and it feels very much like No Exit. Who's the philosopher? Not Camus, not Simone de Beauvoir. Sartre, however you say his name.
Sartre.
I've never gotten it right. I think that was how you say it. Thank you. But like hell is other people, and you're stuck in this world. It's this world, ladies and gentlemen. But I love the idea of like being that techies player, where it's like you are not allowed to lose. You're not allowed to die, which just gets very dark and, Soma, the video game, whatever, but more just like, no, we are not quitting. We are not giving up. I know every sign says we're totally fucked, but nihilism is for cucks, and we're not cucks. We fuck it. Boom. We're on the same page, me just with more swearing and innuendo. Yeah?
Sorry?
How's that? We're on the same page, right? Fuck surrender. How about that? Does that work?
Right.
Hell yeah. Delightful. Well, Max, I hope we can do this again sometime. I wish you the best in your masters and your job.
Thank you.
And your life.
Thank you.
Yes.
Same to you too.
Well, cheers. I don't know what the fuck
not the
I'm
masters
doing.
thing, but whatever you...
I already got the masters. I'm spending... I think PhD is the move. But also, fuck that. So I don't know.
Anyways, the best on your
Anywhere's
journey.
the best. Yeah. To some extent, yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This has been incredible. This has been fantastic. 10 out of 10. You're welcome, audience. You're welcome. God damn it. Okay. I have to pee very badly. It's part of the reason I ended the conversation. You fucking bet it is. I have no reservations. Okay. I keep wanting to call you Alex because you remind me of my very good friend Alex, whose dad just died. Just irrelevant, but very sad. And is on my mind. Not important. Death sucks. Let's get rid of it. Never lose a friend again. Max, you're fucking awesome. Yes! Okay, I have to pee. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.